everyone, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Today we're going to show you how to sew a fabric label onto crochet or knit fabric. I'm going to demonstrate sewing on a label twice. One, to some slightly stretchy fabric like this hat, and also in a way that you would use the label as a bit of decoration versus just a I made this kind of label. But if you're also sewing I made this labels onto the inside of your bags or maybe onto blankets, or basically fabric that doesn't stretch as much, I'm going to show you a couple of quick little things to keep in mind when you're doing that as well. It's essentially the same sort of sewing job, but one we're a little bit neater than the other. You're going to want your labels, a pair of scissors, a needle and thread, and the project you want to sew your label to. Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below. Sewing a label to stiffer fabric that doesn't have a lot of move to it is very simple. All you want to do is thread up your needle. I like to double thread it, where I take one long strand of thread, bring both ends together and knot it at the bottom. That makes my thread a little bit stronger. Decide where it is you're going to place your label, and you can pin it into place if necessary, but typically these things are so small that you can sort of do them without pinning them into place. So this is the inside of my project bag, and I'm going to sew it just to the inside of the top edge on the inside of the bag between my straps. So just right underneath the edge, right inside on the back of the bag. I'm going to hold it in place. I've already threaded my needle and knotted it, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to pick up a loop of crochet or a loop of yarn, and to anchor it in place I'm going to bring my needle through that split thread and just tug gently. You don't want to sew tightly, and you don't want to sew too tight, like too small together. I should say you don't want your stitches too close together. So about every ½ centimeter, or the width of your baby fingernail, is where I'm going to put the needle through, and I'm going to use a whip stitch. So that means my thread and needle is always going in one direction, and it's always going over top of the edge of my label here. So again, I'm picking up a loop of yarn. I'm not pulling too tightly. I'm going to pick up the next loop of yarn, and I'm not pulling very tightly. The next loop, and there's another one right there. So all in all, maybe 4 or 5 stitches up the edge. I'm going to do one more right at the top, and then I'm just going to loop my needle through that thread a couple times to tie a knot, and I'm just going to stick my needle back through the front of my label and trim. So that's one side on, and it's free and open to move. I'm going to make sure that it hasn't moved around on me too much. I'm going to rethread my needle, and I'm going to sew down the other side. But you see, none of those stitches are very far apart, but it's certainly not going to come off anytime soon. And keeping your stitches far apart like that gives it some freedom of movement, so that if your fabric is moving around a little bit, it's not going to pull your stitches out of alignment, and it's also not going to buckle the little label. So it's going to stay in place and look nice. Let's do the other side. We're going to take care to make sure that our label hasn't shifted up or down, and it's still laying nice and straight across the back of the fabric here. I'm going to turn, and I'm going to hold the work. I've already threaded my needle, and we're just going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick up a loop of yarn, go right up through the corner of my label, bring my needle through the treble threads just to sort of knot it in place, and then I'm going to do the same thing all the way down. I'm going to pick up a loop of yarn, go through the edge. I'm going to get this just a little bit closer here. Pick up another loop of yarn and through the edge of the label. And and I'm not pulling very tightly. And there's the next closest loop. I'll use that one again. All the way down. And when I'm at the bottom, I do one more loop again. And I knot off. I like to bring my needle back out through the front of my label and trim it off. And there we go. That is on nice and snug. It's flat against the fabric, but the two top and bottom edges are open, and we're going to leave them open because that's what gives this a little bit more freedom of movement, and you don't really see the inside anyway, but this allows for a little bit more stretch in the fabric. That's if your fabric is fairly stationary and stiff. Let's do one on an item that has a little bit more stretch to it. If you're going to sew a label to something that's stretchy, you want to just keep that stretch in mind when you're sewing. Also, if you're going to sew a label to the front or outside of an item of clothing or a project, because you're kind of treating the label as a little bit of decoration, then it helps to use thread that is the same color as your label. So in this case, I'm using white, unless you want to make sort of more of a statement, and you can use a brightly colored yarn that contrasts with the color of your label, and that way it's going to actually stand out. So something to keep in mind. Now I went ahead and I already sewed on one side of my label. This is going to be sitting along the outside edge of my hat band here. And I made my stitches a little closer together this time, still not very tight. And I also used just the loops of yarn that were right underneath it. So it's the same method that I used to sew on the other one. I just made my stitches a little bit closer together. Now, because this is stretchy, I want to slightly stretch out the fabric and see where it lands. And I see that it's landing right here in between this little bit of the rib stitch. So I'm going to use this edge. As opposed to doing this, I'm going to use those loops there just so that it poofs out just a little bit, but I know that it'll be pretty much flat when I've got it around my head. So I'm going to just stretch my hat band ever so slightly, and I'm going to focus on those loops that are kind of on the down side or on the inside of that little bit of ribbed. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to knot my yarn in place. And then I'm going to grab each of those loops of yarn that are kind of the loops of the stitches. I'm going to keep my stitches a little bit closer together this time, still not very tight. And you can see that I'm going around the loop of yarn. I've got a couple more to do here. I get right down to the bottom. And I'm going to do the bottom one twice. Just like the other side. And then I'm going to make a little knot with my thread. I always like to knot things twice, and then I'm going to take my needle, push it underneath and to the outside, and I just feel that kind of neatens things up. Whenever you're done with your needle, make sure you put it in a safe place. I'm using a little pin cushion. Here's my little pin cushion here, because you don't want a stray needle to wind up underfoot later on. And that's how to sew a fabric label onto crochet or knit fabric, whether it's stretchy or a little bit stiffer. We hope you enjoyed this quick fix, and if you'd like to see a video on making your own little fabric labels like the ones I've made in this particular video, give us a like and let us know down below in the comment section. Until next time, have a great week, stay safe, stay crafty, and we'll see you soon. Bye everybody!
Hi everybody, Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.